Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
It's lovely to see you guys as well. MashaAllah. How are you guys doing? I don't even need a microphone, I'm just doing this out of politeness. How are you guys doing?
Alhamdulillah.
How many of you guys are Muslim, by the way? How many of you guys are Islamophobes? And how many of you guys aren't Muslim but are just interested? Awesome, awesome. I didn't know, because we're going to have an event about Jihad. Of course you would have the white guy talk about Jihad, it's a little safer, I understand. And of course they sent a couple FBI informants out here. This topic is crucial. I'm happy to do it. This is an honor to talk about it. Okay. Let me actually mention also that throughout this talk, I have a couple things I wanted to say. I did bring notes. I had a couple things I wanted to mention. I want to make sure we answer the question. I have a little bit of ground we need to cover. But if at any point I say something, you guys have a question, a comment, concern, criticism, please feel free to raise your hand. It's okay? You guys all right? Tough questions are fine. If I don't know, I'll just make it up. Now, with a topic like jihad, can you guys hear me if I don't use the microphone?
Yeah.
The microphone, it was making me a little awkward.
You want a wireless mic? We got
Yeah,
it.
that's fine.
We got that. It's on.
So the issue of jihad, a struggle is crucial for us. Now, some of us here, the reason I asked, I wanted to get a sense of perspective about why it is that we want to know. Some of us are curious about what is jihad because it's something that we want to know if it's something that we should be doing. It's something we should be involved with. As Muslims, this is something that's part of our faith. We want to make sure we have accurate information about it. If we are of another faith background, perhaps there's a theological interest, right? There's always an interest in shared ideas. There's a common thread that sometimes language is really the only barrier in between. Perhaps that's an interest. And sometimes also there's an interest, I understand, when I saw the event and the framing of the event, I understood that there was perhaps a segment of our population that might have an idea already of what jihad is and wonder if it was something terrifying and evil. Now, for us, there's a hadith. When you go through Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, there's a tradition that the Prophet Muhammad was asked, peace and blessings be upon him, was asked, what are the finest acts, or what are the finest actions that you do? What are the best actions? And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he responded, faith in God and His Messenger. And he was asking him, Amen? And then what's next? What's the next best? And he said, jihad, struggle in the way of God. And he was asked again, and then he said, an accepted hajj, an accepted pilgrimage. Now, for that means, raises some questions for us. And this is now jihad being listed even before, right after iman, right after faith, the basic tenet of faith, but then higher even than one of our pillars of faith, one of our acts of worship. It puts the question to us, we have to make sure, what is it? And of course, this is now a word, this jihad is a word that has changed, has many meanings over time. It changed over time within the life of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. It's changed over centuries of Islamic history. And it's changed even within our lives. Some of the connotations and the pressures around the word jihad have changed. And so I'd like to weave all of those three things together. I hinted at this earlier. What does jihad mean? Just in English? Somebody? I mentioned it, right? I said it as struggle. It doesn't really, what else do you hear sometimes? What else would you think of? What do people associate with jihad? Holy war. Yeah, it's not really that, but what else? Killing infidels. Yeah, it's not really that. What else? Fighting. It's not really that. There are other words for all of these things. Jihad is a verb to struggle. A mujahid is one who struggles. Mujahideen, plural, those who struggle. You can't jihad somebody, you can't be mujahided to death. Like this is the grammatical basis of jihad. Now to struggle, it literally means it's literally as broad, like any language you can use it in all these different contexts. Within Islam though, of course, there's a more specific approach that we have to take. within the Quran, the struggle, and when you look early in the Prophet's life, we can't talk about jihad without talking about Islam in a slightly broader sense. And vice versa, we can't talk about Islam without talking about jihad, perhaps also. Islam is think of it like a flame, like a fire. Imagine a spark, a very small community. This community of faith was made up of a diverse cross-section, perhaps, of Meccan society, the society that they were from. And they faced resistance because of the test, because of the challenge that their beliefs caused to the economic order. Trying to distill this, trying to crunch a lot of history now into a few minutes. Let me take a step back. I don't want to assume anything. There's so much to draw from when we talk about history and when we talk about Islam, that there's no accident. That when you have different people on stage, you'll have very different narratives of Islam, and here we find ourselves now in competition with them. These competing narratives of Islam, they are perhaps extensions of what we desire in our struggle, what we hope for in our faith. And there are traditions even when the Prophet would talk about the people, those people who were the best in Jahiliyyah, even the people who were the best in the time of ignorance were also the best people in Islam, because there's a character that supersedes even dogma. Islam, it started as a very small community, based on the very simple belief of the oneness of God. This demands of us, this is not just an academic discussion, it's not just a theological argument, this demands of us service to each other. A sense of community which is based on all of humanity, remembering that we are all of the same flesh, we are all of the same bloodline. We are here for each other, we serve God by serving His creation. This is Islam. This is a very tall order, this is a very high bar that is set. This is what we are called to through the Quran. This is what we're called to in the prophetic example. This struggle begins as it did in the Prophet's life with himself. The early years after he first started receiving revelation, perhaps it was a time of uncertainty, it was a time of fear for him. But it was also a time of excitement for the new believers, for the possibility that there was a new revelation that God was speaking, was sending a message to people that desperately needed it. As the community grew, because this is a religion that makes sense, this is a faith that appeals to people, and the dignity that people saw in Muslims was something that attracted others, even though they weren't talking about it. Even before they were publicly, what we call da'wah, invitation, before they were publicly inviting people, there was a sense that something was going on. When the revelation increased, when the Prophet was instructed to warn his family and to warn the other nobles of the town, the opposition to Islam increased. Like I said, Mecca was the center of idolatry. Mecca was a center where idolatry was big business. People made pilgrimages with their statues from around the known world. A religion that said that there was only one God and that none of these statues that humans had built were of any value, they were a little bit concerned about that. For years, these Muslims were oppressed, they were tortured, they were sanctioned, economically sanctioned, they were chased out multiple times. We refer to the Hijrah, usually when we refer to the Hijrah, we're talking about the escape of Muslims to Abyssinia, to East Africa. There was even the Hijrah, the Hijrah to Medina. There was a Hijrah even before that, which is the one to Abyssinia. Both of these were migrations, forced migrations, that were done as a way of compromise, to avoid conflict. But then when the agreements were established, when there was a system of rights, when there was a system of laws and contracts and treaties, when these alliances were broken, when these treaties were broken, after years of this prophetic mission, we find the new introduction into our tradition of the struggle, which is very practically so one of self-defense. And this is why within a tradition, and we have to understand it chronologically, we have to understand this is why the Islamic sciences are very detailed. It's an amazing intellectual project because every verse of the Quran, every hadith, every saying of the Prophet that you find in a book, there's an amazing depth, of information about the context that this was revealed in, or the situation that this was set in. And when you look at the life of the Prophet, you see a growth, you see an understanding of strategy, an understanding of place, which is very rational. I'm not gonna stand on stage. I know you guys didn't ask me to come talk about jihad to tell you that. No, jihad is just a spiritual struggle, it's a personal struggle. I appreciate you, sister. This was amazing. This sister's absolutely right. It is all of these things. I'm not here to lie to you about that. And self-defense doesn't have to be a pillar of faith. This is common sense. This is something that we're born with. And even one step further, just as consumption, just as creation, and just as even perhaps destruction and oppression are parts of our human nature, Islam provides an outlet which is rational, which is thinking ahead towards our common good. This jihad first, the struggle, the battles that were fought, there was perhaps a certain reordering of Meccan society. But when the Prophet died, peace be upon him, the tribes of Arabia were united. And this was without much bloodshed. The tribes of Arabia were united under his rule. After that, some of his successors fought the empires at the time who were now in conflict with the Muslims. The family of the Prophet of Islam, this jihad for them involved fighting against oppression within the Muslim world. And throughout all of these conflicts, which were physical, which were very real, which were very difficult for them, upon which our world order is now built, that jihad of education and that jihad of worship, that jihad of purifying the soul, which the Prophet, as well as his family members, have repeatedly been quoted as saying, is the greater jihad, is continued. And did more, when you look at world history, did more for the spread of Islam than any collection of swords. Now there's one other thing that I wanted to say though. Because we learn from this isn't just a matter of history for us, it's not really just, sometimes religion can seem like we're just talking about mythology, like it's just stories. But what we draw from this is an understanding of the perfect life, or the life perfectly lived. We understand from the prophetic praxis, from the growth of that human experience, which is a human experience in touch with the divine in a way that we only are just barely striving for by holding on to his example. What we derive from that growth is also an understanding of how we fit into our world today. What does Islam call us to do? These ethics which we perhaps all agree on. How much does that really require of us? And when we look around the world today, this is another world of what the Arabs would call Jihad. It's another time perhaps of tremendous ignorance, idolatry. Not as many people are worshiping statues, but we worship ourselves now. Perhaps that's even worse. We worship our own attributes, we worship our achievements. We worship our own ideas and our own decisions, our egos. And there are a few things more oppressive than that. We're in a time of torture and violence. So there was this picture behind me is just one example. Even Guantanamo is password protected. So this is on us. This is an opportunity to actually do something about it. These are the problems that we are striving to solve. It's not just about civil rights, it's not just about war. Sometimes it perhaps seems convenient for Muslims to be especially concerned about that. Honestly, we will probably pollute ourselves to death before we go into a nuclear winter. This world is on the brink, and what it is that you want to learn, whatever it is that you know, whatever it is your specialty, you will be called on to do something about it. And there will be some fighting. Sometimes peace depends on some fighting. Some people need to defend themselves because there will always be that group of people who want what is someone else's. Let's be very honest about that. There will always be those people who want what is yours, who want what is not theirs. And God says in the Quran that we're not for using one people against to check another, then maybe even the houses of God would have been overrun. This is part of life, but at the same time, with all of these jihads on the table, with all of these struggles on the table, focus on what it is, focus on the goal, focus on the efficiency and the effectiveness of strategy, and throughout, focus on the ethics of this. I wanted to, there was one point actually, I know it's included twice already, but I promised Brother Yusuf that I would make it a little bit easier for him on the informational side. If we're going to talk about jihad, it requires one of these things, one of these, what we might call a disclaimer. But I don't think of it that way because, and it's just unfortunate that usually when we talk about jihad these days, it's usually in the context of answering questions about jihad from the perspective of Islamophobia. It must be said that even within this very dangerous territory of fighting, the limits on this were so clear. In Islam, the ends do not justify the means. This is something that we must be very careful about. I'm an angry person, I'll be honest. There's a lot of things to be angry about. I'm a happy person too. I'm happy because I love you. Wallahi, I do. I am angry because of how I see the people I love being treated. When you see wars destroying the world around us, and when you see people starving in the street, this is not something that we are just talking about. This is not an academic discussion. These are not statistics. These are our neighbors. And these are our family members. Fascism is already here. It's already bad. And if we don't, excuse me to the camera, if we don't figure our shit out, people will continue to die. People will continue to die. It is an opportunity for us now. We could have been born in the seats of those oppressors. It is an opportunity for us to do the right thing. And now I'll really conclude with a reminder of the Prophet Muhammad, a tradition which is very well known to us. I've probably shared on the stage for the same group before. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he told his companion that it is your duty to help both the oppressed and the oppressor. It's your duty to help your brother whether he is right or wrong, whether he is oppressed or oppressing. And his companions were a little confused and they asked, "O Messenger of God, sure it's right to help the oppressed, but how do we help the oppressor?" And he responded, by stopping him from oppressing. By stopping him from oppressing. If we have some anger in our hearts, if we have some revolutionary spirit, and I hope we do, the energy should be fired by love. And our goal, the visions that we have, the world that we're working towards and that we're fighting toward, hopefully that will be one that's based on love, that's based on mercy. This is the challenge which we're in. This is the struggle that we're in. We don't have to apologize to anyone, but I hope we're not waiting on apologies either. This justice will be served when we stand in the fight for it. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.